Hey folks, it's Patriot Nurse. Thank you for joining me today. In this video, we're going to be discussing prepping priorities and why we should get real about the real world. So first off, thank you so much for joining me. This is going to be a fun video and hopefully you're going to learn some new things. Make sure that you're subscribed and that you click the bell button if you haven't done so already. If you wonder why you're not seeing my videos, algorithm, long story short. So priorities, why they matter and why we should get real about them. A lot of the prepping industry focuses on selling people fear instead of facts, and particularly fear that is historically illiterate and politically amplified and charged fear. That is not what I'm about, and I think that's probably not what most of us are about. We want to be wise with our resources, and particularly in today's day where we're dealing with inflation like crazy. People have limited resources. I have limited resources and I have to triage how I use them. So I wanted to share with you that decision-making process. So the best predictor of the future is the past. And if you're a student of history, then you're going to note that there are three ubiquitous factors present throughout human history, and they are war, famine, and disease. And so a lot of the industry that focuses on selling people preparedness-related gear and preparedness-related junk focuses on capitalizing on things that are frankly not so statistically likely, but of course that are black swan events. The question is, if you've got a limited amount of resources and you only have so much money with which to get started, with which to invest, how do you know where to prioritize? I submit to you that rather than focus on things that are less likely, that we focus on things that are happening today and that have been historically provable and verifiable as likely things that human beings are going to interface with throughout the span of their existence. So war, first off. War, interestingly enough, if you've ever seen the movie Arrival with Amy Adams, which talks about the aliens coming, there's a really good point there of etymology where they discuss the linguistical origins of war and how it has to do with a conflict over scarce resources. This, she noted in the movie in Sanskrit, the language of Sanskrit, but you actually see this in Hebrew also, that milchama, the word for war, has the root word of it, lechem, bread. And so there is conflict over scarce resources. And in particular, in the days that we're facing with a lot of global instability, as if there's ever been a time when the world has been stable. Pax Romana doesn't count because the Romans coming in and like pillaging and burning things in order to control it and create peace. That's not really peace. I don't count it that way. But when you look at, for instance, the issues with Russia and Ukraine and conflict over various different things there, the byproduct and casualty of this is a scarcity in resources, or it's a conflict related to scarcity in resources. With regards to preparedness and focusing on our priorities, we have the ability to look back throughout history and see, okay, war has happened in the past. It is a response to human nature, which is aggression and a conflict over scarce resources in many cases, or a conflict over political ideologies. We know that this is going to happen, so how do we insulate ourselves from this? First off, if you know that war is coming, then you're primarily going to be focusing on your defense and on your physical security and of the security of your resources and your assets. Now, this is a multifaceted, of course, approach, but at the bare minimum, you have to have a way to defend yourself. Because unfortunately, the byproduct of war, particularly as we've seen with Russia and Ukraine recently, is that the innocent are the ones who suffer and the weakest are the ones who are victimized, including women who are raped in times of war. And for this reason, in particular, women and people who are less physically capable of fighting someone off definitely need to focus on a means to defend themselves. People are bad. Like I'm sorry to say this, but I do not hold out a peachy view of human nature. We are at best highly dualistic. And so in times of war, those limitations and those boundaries of accepted behavior in society are completely thrown off. I mean, killing people becomes legitimized. And so if that's the case, then if you can commit murder, then it's very easy to commit other lesser crimes like rape, like pillaging, like burning, like thievery. Everything that results from war and in wartime can be mitigated with your ability to exert counterforce upon someone who God forbid would exert force upon you to destroy your property, to cause you grave bodily harm, physical destruction of the people and things that you hold dear. And so for that reason, we know, because war has happened in the past, because it's happening right now, it's something wise to prepare for in the future. So at the bare minimum, your priorities should be on self-defense, on a way to defend yourself, and on dedicating time, energy, and resources to that skill set. one of the things that I see is this unfortunate self-satisfaction that comes with purchasing a firearm or purchasing ammunition in bulk, and the priorities are screwed up. And I made a video a while back when I called attention to the fact that people store tens of thousands of rounds of ammo, and when it comes right down to it, their marksmanship is abysmal. And I'm not talking about plinking away at a range. I'm talking fundamentals on demand, on a timer, doing various different compound movements and compound skills and compound drills. And most people who are storing large amounts of ammunition and who have large amounts of weapons that have purchased, they cannot meet basic standards, whether it's the FBI qualification or other popular standards like the CSAT qualification. There are many different ways that you can objectively assess your ability to defend yourself. And purchasing weapons is just part of the equation. Competency you cannot buy. And unfortunately, people don't like having their egos bruised, but I would rather offend someone online and say, listen, I know that you've got a pretty arsenal, baby, and I know that you've got a pretty stockpile, but unless you can meet objective standards, you're not prepared. And people don't want to hear that, but that's God's honest truth, and I'm going to call it like it is. So war. Famine. Famine is the second of the big three ubiquitous experiences throughout human history. And famine, unfortunately, is something that we have dealt with in cycles, and usually every decade or so, some place around the world is going to experience a shortage in a critical staple of a food crop, whether it's potatoes with the Irish famine or the North Africa famine that we saw in the 90s with every type of restriction and growth, basically because of drought. Also, you see that there were massive rice crop failures in Asia through centuries past, particularly in Cambodia and the Indochinese Peninsula. Famine is a fact of life because we don't live in a stagnant world. And despite what the climate activists would like to say, there is precious little that we are going to do as human beings to exert force capable of creating massive change in this world. We might do things that perhaps create limited amount of change, but when you consider the role of seismic activity, tectonic activity, and also when you consider the role of our proximity to the sun and magnetic issues and coronal mass ejections, and there's not a whole lot that we're going to be able to do to shield ourselves against this, except for two things. Number one, have extra supplies stored up. There's a biblical precedent for this in the narrative of Joseph if you read the scriptures. Joseph, who was very, very wise, basically saved not just the Egyptian empire, but the totality of the ancient Near East at that time by filling full the grain storehouses in the years of plenty to create a buffer against the years of famine. And because we live in this world, we are going to see shortages from time to time. Sometimes they may be catastrophic, but when we have food stored up on the order of 2 to 5 to 6 months, working your way up from a couple of weeks and then to 1 and then working your way up, I would submit even a year would be a good move for you. But I know that can seem overwhelming to people. So start out first with accruing the staples that you know that you eat. The staples like the canned foods, etc. And once you've got a month's worth of the staples, the canned foods, the things that you can regularly go through, then we can start looking at building out longer term food storage. But I would rather someone, because we know how expensive it is to purchase pre-prepared long-term food storage, I would rather someone focus on riding out 1 month and 2 months at a time and then start looking at the shelf-stable things for 30 years. That may be a different way than some people view the necessity of long-term food storage, but I'm a realist and I would rather have someone have access to food that they already regularly prepare and know how to eat and like versus something stored away in the attic for 30 years that they don't touch, and then God forbid when the time comes, they're completely uninitiated in how to turn this food into something usable. Disease. Disease, unfortunately, is something that has been around for a long, long time. We have really since the dawn of the human species been dealing with some type of bacteria or virus or protozoa or some type of malevolent nasty that inflicts grave suffering on our immune systems. When you look back, for instance, we have evidence of smallpox from Egyptian mummies stretching back 3,500 years at a minimum. We have almost a 5,000-year history of polio that is documented on steles from Egyptology. Steles or steles were basically they're carved effigies, which are historical landmarks, so to speak. Polio, smallpox, these things have been in existence for a long, long time. And regardless of what our leadership might say, they are not eradicated by any stretch of the imagination. You may have repositories in vaults, but they did not just magically disappear. In the case of smallpox, you have, for instance, a human vector, which is us. That it is the only reservoir for this virus. And when you massively eliminate all the reservoirs at the same time, in the case of the inoculation programs, that essentially knocks out the transmissibility. But there are definitely reserves of smallpox in certain labs, definitely here in the United States, and also, of course, in Russia and the former Russian republics, USSR. So disease is a fact of life. And if you're going to be prepared for it, it's a heck of a lot more than just purchasing first aid kits. Your knowledge and your skill sets are so essential. And I'm not talking just applying tourniquets. I'm not talking just wrapping wounds. I'm talking your capability of categorizing and problem solving and forming care plans. So that way, if you are confronted with these situations, that you're not just left hoping, like the past 2 years we've seen, that the people with the shiny badges in the government offices are going to give you the best information completely devoid of political influence. I think that would be magical thinking at the bare minimum. So when you're capable of addressing these things, you're going to be better suited to withstand the uncertain times ahead. Now, when it comes to money, there's a bare minimum amount of supplies that a person needs, whether it's in self-defense and whether it's in food and whether it's in medical supplies. But unfortunately, there's a discipline factor here that people often issue, and they will just, it's easy to do it, guys. It's easy to say, okay, well, I want to check my list off of being prepared, and so I'm going to buy something. Buying things has its appropriate time, but the development of your skills is essential, because here's the bottom line. You do not know where you're going to be when the situation that you're prepared for goes down. Unless you live 100% of your life at home, isolated, far, far away from everybody. And some people do, and that's cool, but that's not the vast majority of people. Human beings are social and communal creatures, and by default, we congregate in areas and we work together cooperatively because this has been the basis of civilization since the times of Mesopotamia. So you don't know where in the world you're going to be. You may be visiting the grandkids. You may be far away at a wedding somewhere. You don't know where you're going to be. And if you are limited, if your competence is limited by the supplies that you have stored up instead of the skills that you have developed yourself, you're going to be over a barrel. So I recommend that as you're prioritizing, devote and save a dedicated amount of money for training and for the development of your skill sets. I do this myself. I'm not just up here, talking the good game on YouTube. I have to discipline myself with the limited amount of time that I have spared to do all these things and to develop my own skill sets. I don't stop. I keep going. That's part of being a human being focused on development and self-growth. The longer that I live, the more I'm convinced that it is really the top tier of people that are dedicated towards personal development and that don't become complacent and that keep at it and are not self-satisfied with checking off something and seeing, for instance, a supply shelf all full, but that are focused on improving themselves and bettering their mind. Whatever you have education-wise in your mind, that cannot be taken away from you. That can't be confiscated. It can't be lost in, God forbid, a fire or flood or some other type of natural disaster. When you dedicate yourself towards developing your skill sets, that will never be taken away from you. So that's really what I wanted to focus on with priorities today. I've been out and about, as y'all know. I recovered from COVID almost 2 months ago and have been traveling extensively and teaching. The joke is in the last class, the Knoxville class that I taught, the joke was that me and my 4 clones, actually that was the Montana class too, me and my 4 clones, like if I can ever get them to all be on the same page, we can get an incredible amount of stuff done. But I am running around like a chicken being chased by Colonel Sanders, trying to get everything done. And I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for being here and for supporting the channel. Make sure that if you want to stay with me and you're getting the videos, that you are pushing the bell button, because if you don't push that, it ain't gonna happen. And I hope you enjoyed the video today. If you did enjoy the video, please subscribe to me here on YouTube. You can also stay with me and support me on Patreon. Subscribe to our cryptocurrency and PayPal. I have links below. You have a couple opportunities to train with me this year. Milwaukee and the Dallas, Texas class, the Keller, Texas class, are my last classes for this year. I'm taking a couple months off because I have to develop my own skill sets and put the effort into that, so that way I can bring you the best as an educator. And that's my goal, to give my students the absolute best. So if you want to train with me, you've got Milwaukee, Wisconsin that's coming up in October, and then Keller, Texas is going to be in December. And then I should be, Lord willing, releasing the 2023 schedule here within the next couple of months. So I hope y'all have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope the video blessed y'all. For now, it's Patriot Nurse signing off, and I'll see y'all later. Bye.